He told me that he is 90 years old, been preaching for 75 years, and she is almost as old as he is. She's a little bit younger than him. And so, it's always a risk when somebody at that age breaks a bone that they may not make a full recovery. So he doesn't know how this is going to affect his ministry. Okay, I'm pausing because it seems like there's an issue on Facebook. So let me deal with that really quickly. I wish they would have told me that before I started my study. All right, let's see if that's fixed. All right. As far as I can tell, everything should be good now. I assume, Mike, you'll tell me if there's any problems further, since you're the one who's giving me comments and something to respond to. But anyways, I want to mention about Dr. Martin. Maybe I'll even go back and edit to recut some of this. But I want to mention about Dr. Martin and about Sister Martin that, of course, I've already said she broke her leg. She's had the surgery. She has to recover, but they're not sure that she's going to make a recovery well enough to be able to drive, the hour that they were driving to go to Faith Baptist Church there to be able to preach for us, or also if they'll be able to continue to make a journey like that to be able to go to his other meetings as well. So because there is an uncertainty, let's say, concerning what's going to happen, I would ask that everybody pray for Dr. Martin and for Sister Martin for her recovery to go well, to go fast, and to be a full recovery. Then also for God to help him to find ways to continue his ministry, even if they have to make some changes to stuff. So I took a second to check. Looks like everything is good now that Facebook caught up with us. The YouTube stream is 3 minutes in when the Facebook one's just starting because there was a technical issue. But hopefully everything is good to go now, and we'll have people coming in from that side as well. So let's go ahead and get into our Bible study tonight. We're going to talk about what to me is one of the more important things on our list. So let's pull up our list for a second. Our chart, I should say. As we pull up our chart, you'll note that we've already talked about all of those circles in the center: the fear of the Lord, unbelief, the heart, the mind, all those things we've discussed in detail. We've talked about wisdom, foolishness, knowledge, scornfulness, simplicity, and understanding. So we've been around that inner ring. Now we're making our way around the outer ring as we talk about the extension of these things. So last week we discussed how that in reality, what you have, find which hand allows me to, there we go. What you have in reality in terms of wisdom and foolishness is a spectrum. We talked about this with, I believe, love on Sunday. But you have, love. We have a spectrum wherein that which goes above that center line, because it's being led by the fear of the Lord, or touched by the fear of the Lord, goes into the realm of wisdom. And as your wisdom solidifies in the truth and lines up more with God's point of view, you reach into what's called sound wisdom. So we understand foolishness is when you go into the negative of that. And that's when you lose that ability. You go away from that ability to be able to use knowledge and to properly apply those things. So when foolishness reaches a certain point where if sound wisdom is achieved by solidifying your wisdom in the truth, foolishness being completely degraded of all wisdom, deteriorated of all wisdom, that's how you reach frowardness. So that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. We'll go around the rest of this ring and talk about these other things like a proud and haughty spirit, subtlety, brutishness, and humility. We'll talk about all those things across the next few weeks. And then after that, we make one more pass around that farthest out band with discretion, prudence, low self-esteem, hasty in words, hasty in actions, wise in your own conceit. We'll go around those things. And then after that, we're pretty much done with our chart here, which has kind of been the guiding principle of how this study has worked. So now that we are getting into the middle part of this, or closer to the end of it, because these last parts go easier because I only have to do one lesson per thing, and sometimes even double up those lessons. What I want you to see is this, that we established this, I guess, last week or the week before when we talked about sound wisdom, that you have that spectrum. And the way that your wisdom goes from being a wisdom that is still somewhat sensual, somewhat worldly, somewhat devilish, that you're starting in that direction, but somewhere at the baseline, there's still this thing where your worldview is being impacted by your feelings and by what the world has taught you and by how you've been indoctrinated by the things that the devil has put out there. Some of that's still impacting you. So it's not that you lack altogether the ability to use knowledge, you're just still not able to do it fully. And there's where the journey of wisdom is. You learn little by little how to actually use your knowledge properly by learning how to line it up with the truth. And that's what solidifies it. That's the backbone of wisdom, is truth. That's the spine that supports it and holds it all up. And until you root all your wisdom in the fear of the Lord and in truth, as the spine of it, then what's going to happen is you're going to have an ability to use some of your knowledge, but you're never going to be able to rightly, you're not going to be able to come to that right conclusion of how to use it. Now, we're going in the opposite direction of that today, though, as we see that the further someone abandons the truth, the more perverse their mind becomes. So that's going to be the key word that's going to come up today, is perverse, because in opposition to truth, you have perverse or crookedness or frowardness, wherein the truth is abandoned and you bend and twist and change to make it fit however you want to. So we saw what happens as someone makes that journey up, from the baseline, as they get touched by the fear of the Lord and it solidifies. What happens when somebody goes down and it begins to degrade is initially that person, because they're being governed by their feelings, by what the world teaches them, by all this kind of stuff. You have someone who, as a fool, someone who in their heart has said there is no God. It's a heart issue that has robbed them of an ability to actually see the world for what it is and use the knowledge that they have. That person, at first, the issue is that they're easily deceived. The issue is that they don't get it. They can't figure it out. They're missing the truth. But in reality, what happens as you go down that journey and you continue down that road is eventually you reach the place where you become the deceiver. It's no longer an issue that you can't rightly use your knowledge, or you can't use knowledge right. It's that you abuse it. You mistreat it. You twist the facts. You change the information. I think you actually could see this, for example, if you look at science and the progression of how science has changed over centuries. If you go back to a better age of scientists, when they were actually concerned a little more with the truth and with the scientific method, you had men who, even if they couldn't fully understand their findings, they were still struggling with it, they still could come to the right conclusion. But over time, especially as money became more important than the information, and you had to, fill out certain grants and you had to achieve certain goals and you had a certain amount of time to do it and so forth. As those things became more important, you began to see men who couldn't see the truth that was right in front of their faces. They would do a study and they would come out with the exact opposite of what the results had said. And this is what they're proclaiming. But at this point, I would still say a lot of them were doing it because of the pressure, not because of an outright willingness to lie. But especially as you see evolution coming onto the scene, you see a dramatic left swing where those men who were struggling with how to apply what they were finding because it didn't line up with their worldview, then suddenly started to lie about it. They began to change and twist the information. And I think that's probably one of the greatest examples of the progression of frowardness you can see, is you have people who it's their job to be concerned with the truth, to use the information that's out there for them, take that knowledge and to plug it into the equations and see what comes out from it. And okay, here's the information we've gotten. Now, somebody who's truly doing that is going to come to a right conclusion. But what happens is that when you have somebody doing that, who their view of the universe is, well, it must be millions and billions of years old, and all of this kind of stuff had to happen. And even though none of this actually makes any sense, and even Nick was bringing a good discussion about this the other day when we were finishing up from the baptism. He was talking about how none of the mutations or cellular splitting or anything could account for genders. Some pretty good points he had there. There's little simple things that anybody who's actually concerned with the truth would actually be able to step back and realize, okay, this isn't lining up. The data is not supporting this. But what happens is when your heart is actually foolish, you are someone who proclaimed yourself to be wise, but has become a fool because you're not actually looking for what does the information really say. What is the all the answers, all of my equations I've run, all my experiments, what is the outcome of all of them? And the outcome of all of them is always going to be that there is a creator, that someone has made this. But when you really don't want to believe that, that's where that, your feelings, and the world doesn't want you to say that. That's where the world comes in. And the devil is fighting to keep you from saying that. That's where he comes into it. You see these people going into foolishness. And as they dive further and further into said foolishness, eventually they reach a place where they become morally bankrupt. They become so corrupted and so perverse and twisted. And again, perverse is going to be the word of the day. They become so perverse that it's no longer an issue of ignoring what the outcomes say, ignoring what the information says, ignoring what's right there in front of your face. It becomes lying about it. It becomes twisting and bending, and this information was you don't understand it. Those kind of things. One of the greatest examples of that, still continuing on my illustration that I'm using, is radiocarbon dating. They know it doesn't work. Nothing has ever been radiocarbon dated that made any sense or accurate, that they didn't already know the age of it, and they just told you, yeah, this is the age of it. Everything they've ever dated that they didn't already know the age of it, to be able to tell you exactly what it was. They've come up with some off-the-wall number. It's never consistent. It's not accurate. The very concept doesn't work, because for it to work, the planet would have had to have reached equilibrium, meaning the amount of carbon that's coming in, that's being produced versus what's being released through the atmosphere, would have to be equal. And you don't have that. You've never had that. They'll test something one day and it'll tell you it's this old. They'll test it another day and it's this old. And it's really typically just based off of what answer they think you're looking for. I know of an experiment where they dug up dirt and they told them, this is the top layer, this is the bottom layer. So they gave them, this is 5,000 years old, this is 10,000 years old. Then they sent the same bags back, but switched the labels so that they said, this is the top layer, this is the bottom layer. And they switched the results. Even, they lied. They gave you what they thought you wanted. It's the bottom layer. Of course, it has to be 10,000 if the top layer is 5,000. So, depending on which one the label said, even though the dirt was the same, they switched their answer based off the labels. So my point of that is that we live in a society where the people who are supposed to be the wisest, supposed to be guiding us in what is true and right, are probably the greatest examples of some of the most foolish people out there, who outright reject and deny. I saw a fellow I go to school with. I saw today his Facebook. He's very intelligent in terms of, he has a lot of knowledge. He's very educated, and yet at the same time, it's exactly what I'm talking about. If you go through his Facebook feed, he's somebody, he professes to be a Christian, but almost everything he shares, you read, and it's like, man, do you really, you read that article and that's what you get out of it? You read these things and that's what you get. Something's missing. There's no wisdom here if you can't see that that's not what it's saying. And that's where you see that the way of the Froward comes about. In fact, my verse for tonight, I actually had it written down to start in a different order, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into this so we can make up for a little bit of lost time because I got deep in my illustration. Proverbs 19 and verse 3, the foolishness of man perverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against the Lord. So how is frowardness the progression of foolishness? Since, to be honest with you, a lot of verses don't link the two of them together. You have to actually look at the context of what is said about foolishness versus what is said about frowardness. And there's where you begin to see the link between the two of them. It's not one of those things where you see like wisdom and foolishness where they're contrasted one against the other. In fact, what you see quite often is wisdom is contrasted against frowardness. That's one of the things that helps you to see that they're linked. However, this verse is very important because as we actually start studying what frowardness is, you're going to notice that the word that's always contrasted against frowardness as a synonym is perverse. Because something is perverse is something that is going against the truth. It's taking and twisting the truth. It's lying. It's it's cheating. It's whatever. It's perverse. So something is perverse is something that's crooked. Something that's bent. Something that goes against the truth. So he says it is the perverseness of a fool's heart. So because that fool has already started his journey by perverting his heart to say there is no God, he's already bent and twisted his heart to say there is no God. He made it go against its natural design. And that's why we seen in our study the other day that frowardness is an abomination. So he's already took his heart and bent it to go against his natural design to say there is no God. Because of that bending that he has done, it's like anytime you bend a piece of metal, and it's what I used to do professionally. When you bend one, you've weakened it to a certain degree, and it's going to be easier to bend it the next time. Many metals, you either keep bending them the way you're going because you ever try to put them back the way they were. Aluminum's a good example of that. You'll break it. So you keep bending, but if you ever try to go back to straighten it, you're just going to break it. So what you have with this example is he's telling you that the thing about the foolish is it's the perverseness of his heart that causes this problem. That let's read the verse again. So, the foolishness of man perverteth his way. So I'm saying it backwards, so I had to go back and reread it. The foolishness that's in his heart, because it begins with foolishness. You have first that a man says there is no God, so unbelief. That unbelief then creates foolishness, and then that unbelief and that foolishness compound to make perverseness, or frowardness is the primary word we're using here. You could use perverseness, but froward is let's say the word with a deeper definition here, and the Bible has more to say about it. That's why we go with that one. And his heart fretteth against the Lord. So you see, it goes from being a man who in his heart's trying to convince himself there is no God to where it eventually becomes a hatred toward God. And that's what you see. And we even saw that with foolishness. If, while you're still in the realm of foolishness, you already go from denial to hatred. But when somebody enters into frowardness, they've reached a place where they hate God. And that's why, like Stefan, you mentioned, they spent billions to try to prove that God doesn't exist. Well, that's why, because they hate him. They hate the very concept of God. It frets them. It irritates them. It's an annoyance, the very idea that there could be a creator they'd have to give an account to. And that's why you have men who are supposed to be brilliant, who are spending fortunes out of their own pocket to run advertisements to tell people not to believe in God. And it's like, if he's not real, just leave it alone. It's none of your business. If somebody believes, they don't. If they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. But for these people, their hatred towards God is manifested in the fact that they're fighting against somebody they don't believe in. I mean, think about that. That's really crazy. If you're fighting somebody you don't believe in. Now, I will teach my children, for example, that I don't believe in certain holiday characters, and I'll teach my children that these things are not true because somebody else is paying money to teach them that it is true. They run it in the cartoons and so forth. As a pastor, I will advise people in my church to teach their children these things are not true. But I don't get mad if I walk in a store and I see, Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, that kind of stuff sitting out on the shelf. I don't get offended by that because the only offense I would take is that it's distracting from Christ. So there is some degree of offense, but it's not like I go into stores, this upsets me. For example, I've let my kid watch, I let Josiah, the other two haven't ever done this probably, but I let him watch a little bit of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I just made sure that before we watched, this is not real. This is a cartoon like all the other cartoons you watch. Then we watched it, and there was no problem. There was no fretting. We didn't finish it because we got a little bit irritated with the fact that everybody in that cartoon is a terrible person. But other than that, it wasn't an issue, because I knew it's not real. So, we could watch it as long as we know that. But when you have somebody who lays awake at night, who wants to spend billions of their own money trying to disprove somebody they don't believe in, that shows you there's an issue with the heart. So that is where you have to understand all this comes from that issue in the heart, and it compounds and it grows, and you get to a place where you're so desperate to deny God that becomes your entire worldview. And so you begin with foolishness to deny what's clearly in front of your face, and with frowardness to lie about what's clearly in front of your face. There's where the progression goes. And I think in those terms, you actually probably have an understanding of everything else I need to say tonight. However, this is a Bible study, so we will go back through and pick up some of the verses that I have on my list here. So let's go back to Proverbs chapter 2, because that's where I was going to begin. Let's start in verse 10. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things, who leaveth the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil and delight in the frowardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and they froward in their paths. So you notice here that you have this idea that if you have wisdom, wisdom is going to protect you from this. That there's, and understand, I don't have time to really get into this tonight. Maybe as part of this study, I can do a more in-depth lesson on this. But in the book of Proverbs, the froward man and the strange woman are often used together. And even you'll see if you keep reading where I stop, the strange woman comes up. And they're used as two types of temptation, two ways in which we are tempted. Now, they're literal people in the sense that a froward woman is a an adulteress, and strange woman is an adulteress, and a froward man is a trickster. He's a charlatan, a con artist of some kind. You could take it in other ways, but that's essentially the idea. Now, you have to understand that concerning both of them, they're used as a personification of lust. So you have one that is lust more in the traditional sense we understand. That's actually the strange woman, that she makes herself appear beautiful to you and calls you to come in. And as she's calling you, you don't realize that, inside's nothing but death. And that's the way most things we think of with temptation works. It's the way drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff, the way it tempts us. Most any sin, you could look at it in those terms. That is drawing you and saying, come, but you don't show you. They don't advertise what's on the other side of the billboard, the advertisement. Now, the froward man, his is a little bit different in that he seems to be wanting to show you something, but once you start down the path, he changes it and bends it and twists it so that you can't figure out how to get back. It's somebody who, like somebody leads you into a maze and gets you lost. So it's one of those things, which also you could contrast this. Or not contrast, but you could see this in things like drugs, where somebody tells you, you should try one, you'll be okay. But once you go down that road, you get twisted and bent so much that you can't really come back from it anymore. Like what I said about aluminum, once you bend it past a certain point, you can't straighten it anymore without breaking it. So that's kind of what you see with the two of them. Now, saying that, the idea of this passage and of a lot of passages in the first part of Proverbs is that if you would get wisdom and understanding and knowledge as well in this passage, they would protect you from going down these roads. They would keep you from getting tricked by this evil man who speaketh froward things, who leaves the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil and delight in the frowardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked and they froward their paths. So you'll notice crooked is the word used here, but again, crooked and perverse are used almost synonymously. They're not used a tremendous amount anyways in the Bible, but they're used pretty synonymous when they are. And they're also used synonymously, froward, I should say. But saying that, you're being taught the simple ideas in terms of how this progression works. It says if you started off at 0 and you want to keep from being brought down into frowardness, you don't want to be misled and brought into this, then get wisdom, because that's the only direction you can go to avoid this. If not, little by little, your life's going to drag you to foolishness, to frowardness. Then Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 and verse 24 says, he that keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from thee. And then we can also read, I think I mentioned verse 25, but put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips far from thee. Let thine eyes look right on, and let thine eyelids look straight before thee. Ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand, nor to the left hand. Remove thy foot from evil. So we know Proverbs 4:23 very well. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. You have to understand that this perverseness that he's warning about, because you see here the contrast of put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from me. That's usually what you're going to see concerning these two words, where you have a verse that's essentially saying the same thing, but one side of it says froward and the other side says perverse, and it shows you that it's the same thing. So if you ever you see that a lot of times in Proverbs. If you're having a hard time defining a word, look at the other half of the verse, and there's a very good chance that a synonymous word is being used to define it. And in this case, that's what you're getting, a word that means pretty close to the same thing. So you have this word perverse, which is dealing with this idea of something that's crooked, something that's not right, something that's going away from the truth. It's perverted the truth. You have the idea of that. Since I'm giving a definition, let me give you the Webster's. It says literally turn aside, hence distort it from the right. So something that's distorted from the right or turned aside from it. And he's warning you to guard your heart, because if you don't, and you don't protect your lips from becoming froward or perverse, and we're going to see in a minute that that comes from a perverse heart, then you're going to go down the wrong path. And then you actually see this idea, keep your eyes straight and focus forward, consider where you're going, don't look to the right hand or the left hand, because what is perverseness? It's distorted or turned from the right. As something has been turned aside. And so God's trying to protect you from being turned aside from the truth. And that's what he's trying to do with wisdom here. He's trying to get you to be wise so that you don't get turned aside by foolishness. All right, so Proverbs 19, verse number 1. It says, better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. So this idea is going to be continued. I don't want to spend too much time right there because there's actually a few verses that continue this idea. But God's telling you it's better that perverseness or frowardness, these two things are so dangerous to you. He says it'd be better for you to just go ahead and be poor but walk in your integrity than to do whatever you have to be rich and be perverse and be a fool. So I lead with that verse because I want to show that there is some contrast or something. I keep saying contrast, some connection. There are times where I mean to say contrast, but I keep saying what I don't mean to. There is some connection between perverse and foolish, or frowardness and foolishness. And he says, he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. So he's saying that if you have a foolish heart, that creates a froward heart, that creates froward speech. And again, I'll show you that in a moment, because as we go through these verses, you're going to see that. And he's saying it'd be better for you to just keep your integrity and be poor than, do whatever you have to be rich and wind up being someone who's foolish and perverse. Proverbs 28, verse 6. Better is the poor that walketh in his uprightness than he that is perverse in his ways, though he be rich. And I included that one to show that is the intention, is that if you have to, to bend your way and you have to go away from the truth to be rich, it'd be better that you just stay poor so that you can stay upright. That's the idea there. Now let's go to a passage we've actually talked about quite recently, which is Proverbs 6 and beginning in verse 12. It says, a naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward mouth. He winketh with his eyes, he speaketh with his feet, he teacheth with his fingers. Frowardness is in his heart. So now you see that somebody who speaks frowardly, someone who is willing to speak in a way that bends and twists the truth, someone who's willing to lie, manipulate, those kind of things, someone who the very definition of froward is perverse, someone who's perverse in what they do, they're willing to go away from it, go away from the truth. It's because in his heart, he's already gone away from the truth. Froward, verse 14 again, frowardness in his heart, he deviseth mischief continually, he soweth discord. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly, suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. So there is a warning that when you go down that road and you let this aversion to the truth, this willingness to go away from the truth, you let that, seep in and become more solidified in you, so that, as opposed to sound wisdom solidifying the truth, you instead degrade the truth. You get to a place that begins to be visible through your speech. It begins in the heart. It comes out through the mouth. Jesus taught this. It's not what goes in that defiles, but what comes out, because it proceeds forth from the heart. So as this foolishness turns into frowardness, that is manifested, it's seen through the way somebody speaks. And God says when you get to that point, you're close to destruction, that there's destruction that's coming. And there's a couple ways to read that. There's a few more verses that deal with it, so I could get to it as we get to those. But I want you to understand that God's destruction can mean multiple things. He could be talking about the destruction of the body, or he could be talking about eternal condemnation. And to be honest with you, when he talks about somebody who's froward being close to destruction, he talks about the fool being like close to it, like to the border. But the froward, he says, they're going to be destroyed. I think in all honesty, he's showing you when somebody gets to the place where they despise the truth, they're willing to lie, they're willing to manipulate, they're willing to destroy this, that person's reached a place where he gets to like the Romans 1, being turned over to a reprobate mind. Somebody who, thinking themselves to be wise, has become fool. Somebody who, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, but worshiped the creature over the creator. It's very much the epitome of what's being discussed there, that when there is no truth and the truth is just what you feel and what you want it to be, and you're willing to lie and twist it, then you've got to a place where you're not interested in what God says or anybody says about God, and you've set yourself on the path for destruction in a solidified way, wherein you've rejected the truth that was there in front of you. Now, Proverbs 10, verse 31 and 32. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 31 and verse 32. The mouth of the just bringeth forth wisdom, but the froward tongue shall be cut out. The lips of the righteous knoweth what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness. So you see again this idea that someone who has a just heart, their heart is right. And that's what just is. Just means legally correct. Righteous means right with, just means legally correct. So someone whose heart is just, that's going to bring wisdom out of their mouth, because we see that wisdom and justice are connected. So someone who has a heart that's right is going to help them to speak wisely. And again, that's why it begins with the fear of the Lord. But someone whose heart is froward, that person, they're going to speak froward things. And God says he's going to cut that froward tongue out. He's going to shut their mouth at some point. Now, whether it be when every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, or whether it be in this life, that's his choice. And I would say, I mean, you see people who blaspheme and attack God and criticize, and God shuts their mouth in many mighty ways. I mean, I saw recently there was a comedian who got up on stage saying that God loved her most because she didn't get COVID, even though she flew all these places. She makes fun of God and mocks God. And then immediately when she made that joke that she was God's favorite, she just suddenly fainted. I mean, she collapsed right there on the stage. And it was an impressive thing to see, because the timing of it was so perfect, because she had just talked about how she was healthier and better to do than everybody. And then she just right down after she made a joke about God, when she often makes jokes about God, but eventually her mouth was shut. I've seen people who attack God openly, who have gotten cancer and lost their ability to speak. You see a lot of stuff. Now, it doesn't always mean that everything's the judgment of God. Some things are, some things are not. It's his decision when he does that. But you do see that sometimes he chooses to shut somebody's mouth in this lifetime. Sometimes he chooses to shut their mouth at the judgment seat. But one day their tongue's going to be cut out. It's going to be shut one way or the other. So that's kind of the idea that's being discussed there. And then he says in verse 32, the lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness. So he's telling you that a froward heart is not just a heart that is destitute of the truth, but it is an evil heart. It has become evil. You understand that worse than you see a fool, because sometimes somebody who's just starting on that journey to foolishness, you can have a little sympathy for them. But somebody who has went into frowardness, there's no room left for sympathy. Their heart has become evil. You think about the verse we read there, or the passage that read in Proverbs 6, when he says that they close their eyes and they imagine evil. They think about how they can hurt people, how they can take advantage of people. He's telling you this person's heart is evil. That's why all they think about is how to twist the truth and how to hurt people. That's why all they're capable of producing is this frowardness, this perverseness, where they've twisted and threw away the truth, and all they're spouting out is their opinions and their desires and so forth, so that the truth is no longer relevant to them. All right, then Proverbs 16, verse 28. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 28 says, a froward man soweth strife, and a whisperer separateth chief friends. A violent man enticeth his neighbor and leadeth him into a way that is not good. Oh, here's actually a passage. I'm sorry, I said it is in chapter 6, but it's chapter 16. He shutteth his eyes to devise froward things. Moving his lips, he bringeth evil to pass. And then the next is about the white head. So I'll stop there. I threw myself off because I was talking about this as if we already read it, but it's actually the verses we needed to read. But anyways, what you have here is, it says a froward man, he tries to cause problems because that evilness is in his heart. He's happy to sow strife, which is to make fights. He'll whisper, come in your ear and say, did you know this person said that, to separate chief friends. He's violent. He wants to fight with his neighbor. He tries to lead people in a way that's not good. And he shuts his eyes and imagines what kind of evil he could do. He's the kind of person, when he's laying down at night or he's resting, he's thinking about how he can take advantage, how he can hurt, how he can mislead somebody. So there's where you see that frowardness is far more dangerous than you probably would think of it as. That foolishness is dangerous and evil, but frowardness is, you've went a step further. You've went to the place where there's little good to be said, if any at all. And then finally, Proverbs 22 and verse number 5 is my last verse I have written down here. It says, thorns and snares are in the way of the froward. He that doth keep his soul shall be far from them. So he says, when you go down this road of rejecting the truth and supplanting it with your opinions, with your desires, with what the world teaches, and so forth, that you completely throw away the truth. It's not that you don't understand it, you don't know how to use it, you're scared of it, but you've thrown it away, which is where you're at when you've reached frowardness. He says you've went into a path where there's thorns. It's a dangerous path, and if you have any wisdom at all, any sense at all, you'll keep your soul from that path. You'll protect yourself from going down that way. So that's the bulk of what I need to say tonight in terms of a lesson. We already understand the concept of that spectrum from sound wisdom to frowardness, with wisdom and foolishness, and the fear of the Lord and unbelief, and how all that stuff's connected. We've studied that deep enough that you should know that by now. And so you see that at the heart of all of that is truth. That when somebody comes to the truth, that's your foundation there, that there is a God, and that truth begins to govern the way you see the world around you. Then that progresses to where little by little you solidify the way that you use knowledge. You solidify the way you view the world around you, to where it becomes sound, it becomes secure, it becomes correct. And that's where wisdom really becomes true wisdom, is when it becomes sound wisdom, and it lines up with God and the way he sees things. Whereas if you go that other direction, which is what we've studied tonight, that instead of beginning with that key foundational truth, there is no God, the person who goes the other direction throws away that key foundational truth by saying there is no God. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And so because they begin this journey by denying the most foundational principle that any person has to accept, that there is a God, they start down a path where little by little truth doesn't matter anymore. It begins with somebody who just doesn't understand. Like, they see that the science doesn't line up with what they're teaching. They see that the evidence doesn't match what's being taught in the school and so forth. And they'll go along with it because they don't understand the truth. They don't know how to use that knowledge. They don't know what to do with it. So they go along with these things. But as you go along with it, eventually, because you're being taught and you don't probably even realize it, that all that matters are your feelings. All that matters is what society says. All that matters is this devilish indoctrination that's taking place across the world. That as you go across that, as you go down that road, you cross a certain point where it's not just that somebody doesn't know what to do with the truth anymore, but they intentionally don't want it. They know that they're wrong. They know that they're lying. But they willfully continue to lie to people. I guess I could compare it to some of the cults you see, that there are people, for example, in the Mormon church, that they have no idea just how evil and crazy that religion is. But there are other people who are at the top of that religion that they know exactly how evil and crazy it is. Thing is, they're so far given to it and so far gone that they don't care. It doesn't matter. You can show them that the Bible says they're wrong, but they don't care at all. Now, whereas that person who's still at the place where they just don't know or they don't understand that what they're doing doesn't line up with the Bible, there's a little bit of hope for that person, and there's a little bit of chance you might be able to correct them. But when somebody gets to the place where they absolutely are the enemy of the truth and they don't care about the truth, and whatever you want to be true is true, that person reaches a place where I would dare say I would say you reach a place where you're definitely it's questionable as to whether it's possible to ever help that person again. The only hope I see in the Bible is that passage in Titus where Paul tells them to rebuke them sharply so that they may be sound in the faith. But even that's a maybe. He's not saying it's going to work. He says, just rebuke them, because if there's any hope, that's what little hope there is. If there's any chance that they haven't crossed a place where they've completely turned against God and they're not willing to hear anything he's ever going to say, this is it. Rebuke them sharply. So as someone goes into frowardness, it's such a dangerous road because they're condemning themselves. They're signing themselves up for destruction. It's not that God so much is shutting the door. It's that person has said, I don't care what God says, and I'm not going to listen to any of it. And there's a difference between somebody who says it and doesn't mean it, but froward person is somebody who means it, somebody who's sincere about it. And that's where you start talking about, for example, the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit and those kind of things. That's where you get into talking about something like a reprobate mind and all of that, is you're understanding it's not somebody who just says it because they think it's what it'll get you to leave them alone, when this person really doesn't care. And you look at people who are in power in this world, the people who are often the rich ones, that's usually them. They've reached a place where they don't care. It doesn't matter what, God could come slap them in the face and they still probably wouldn't turn. And you may have a hard time believing that, but just think about it. The Bible tells you there's going to be people standing at the judgment seat of Christ, standing literally in front of him and trying to justify themselves by saying, Lord, didn't we do this in your name? Didn't we do that in your name? I mean, they're standing at the judgment seat and they're still defending themselves. So when you look at it in those terms, there are people in this world right now that if God chastened them directly, if they actually could see and know for sure it was God, they're so far gone from the truth, so forsaking of it, they wouldn't care. That's why actually one of the verses I should have included in this list tonight, as he talks about the heart of men, and he says that even though hand join in hand, they shall not be unpunished. He says that when you have people like that who they try to stand against God, they're going to join together and they're going to fight against God. He says they will not go unpunished. They'll still be punished just like everybody else. See if I can find that one real quick. Though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not be unpunished, but the seed of the righteous shall be delivered. Or Proverbs 16:5 is another one. It says, everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. We know pride goes very much close with foolishness, but Proverbs 11, the first one I read, is the one I was looking for, because verse 20 says this: they that are of a froward heart are abomination to the Lord, but such as are upright in their way are his delight. Though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not be unpunished, but the seed of the righteous shall be delivered. He says when somebody gets to the place where they're so far rejecting of the truth that they could, stand at the judgment seat of Christ and still argue that they're right, they've lied to themselves and tricked themselves that much. He says that even when they join their hands together, they're still going to be punished. They can try to unite against God. It doesn't matter. But the problem is that their heart has so far rejected God that they're not willing to hear anything God has to say. All right, so let me give a chance for anybody who might have a question they want to type in, something they want to send in for a question, so I can take a moment to answer that. As you're taking a moment to type in your questions, let's maybe recap one or two thoughts there as I give a chance for it. Then what I want you to make sure you understand about the froward is it's so far progression of foolishness. It is the full extent of what happens when somebody becomes foolish. The fool is someone who doesn't know how to use it, or it is someone who doesn't care how to use knowledge. That's where you get to. You get to a point where before, even if you try, you're not putting the pieces together right. You're not understanding how to put the puzzle together. The froward is somebody who will take the puzzle, cut it up, change it, make it into something it's not, or put it together wrong and then tell you, look, it's right. And then when you tell them, no, it's not right, you're missing pieces. Oh yeah, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Or they'll cut it up and you'll tell them you're not supposed to do that. Oh yeah, that's exactly how you're supposed to put together a puzzle. Who are you to tell me how to put together my puzzle? I bought this puzzle. And they don't realize that there's a creator who made that puzzle, and they're the ones to tell you how to put it together. The one who made it gets to tell you what is right and what is wrong. But a froward person has said in their heart, there's no God. They don't care about God. And they don't realize the creator gets to decide what is true. It's like what we said in church the other day, that you'll have that picture of somebody looking at a 6, and on one side it's a 6, and on the other side somebody standing, and to them it's a 9, and they think they've got this profound truth that it's just a matter of your perspective. But the fact is, the person who made it put it a certain way. The person who created that, whoever wrote that 6, wrote it as a 6, and you can call it a 9 all day long, but it doesn't change the fact that it was made to be a 6. It was put there to mark something. And the truth that it was put there to mark cannot be changed, no matter how many times you walk around it, no matter how many different perspectives you look at it, no matter how much you want it to be something else. You just can't change the truth. The truth is the truth. But a froward person, everything I just said would be wasted on them, because of the fact that they have already decided that there is no truth. The only thing that matters is their opinion and versus your opinion. That's all it comes down to, and that's why they don't care what God has to say about anything. All right, so that's a pretty long little spiel there. I think I gave enough time. If somebody was going to ask a question, they would have done it by now. So I'm going to assume I don't have any questions coming in tonight. I appreciate those who came in to be a part of the Bible study. Okay, I do have one question now. What drives the people to not just merely accept some people do believe in God? If they're right, it doesn't matter anyway. Well, it's what I said. I mean, the foolishness in somebody's heart causes them to fret against the very idea of God as it perverts their heart. So, as foolishness progresses into frowardness, we saw that in our first verse there in Proverbs 19:3. It's not just that they deny God, but they get to a point where they hate God. The very idea of God is an affront to them because it's the opposition of everything they stand for, because they stand for this idea that there's no creator, no meaning, no purpose. You just do whatever you want to. And what's interesting, if you look at it, a lot of things they won't oppose. Like they don't, most people who are against God, they're not running advertisements saying that to Muslims, to go reject Allah and live however you want to. They're not running advertisements telling Buddhists, to throw away your religion and live however you want to. They're not throwing away, sending advertisements telling Hindus throw away your religion and live however you want to. Dawkins, on the other hand, who was the person I keep referencing, he pays advertisements to run in London, which has at this point as many Muslims as it does Christians, probably, if not more. I'm not sure on the statistics, but I know it's being overrun by Islam. Given the number of Indians that live in London, I'm sure there's a great number of Hindus living there. And yet he doesn't run advertisements attacking Allah, and he doesn't run advertisements attacking Hinduism. And in his own debates, in his own interviews, when asked why, his answer is because he assumes that anybody who's remotely intelligent already knows that Allah is not real and that's not God. And that anyone of intelligence already knows that Hinduism is just a way to live. It's not a true religion. He's saying the gods they worship are all fake. He knows that anybody of wisdom would know that. It's just the lifestyle is what he accepts from it. So he'll say that, and then at the same time, he'll spend millions and millions of dollars to try to get people to deny God, the God of the Bible, because that's the one he's scared of. And I think he's the prime example for this, that something inside of him frets against the God of the Bible, that God of judgment. Because think about it, Allah is a God of judgment too. So it's not just that he's against a God of judgment, because we often emphasize that and seem to put it all on the fact that they don't want to be judged. It's the fact that they know deep down, is no matter how much they have said in their heart there is no God, there is a God, and it is the God of the Bible, and that God is going to judge them. That's why you find these men who don't feel like they have to oppose other religions and other gods, but they feel like they have to oppose the God of the Bible. Any country, anywhere around the world, you'll find people like that. The only places you'll find people paying to run advertisements against Islam are in countries where Islam has completely destroyed their society and ravaged, their people. That's the countries that run advertisements against Islam. The countries where Islam is still pretending to be friendly and nice, they don't run those advertisements. Christianity, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's making it a better country. It doesn't matter if it's helping people. It doesn't matter if it's building orphanages. It doesn't matter what it's doing. You have evil men of perverse hearts always are going to withstand against God. And he says they can join hand in hand. They're still going to be punished. It doesn't matter. The issue is that their heart is upset at the very idea of the God of the Bible. And so I don't know if that's the full answer you were looking for your question, but hopefully that makes sense. That the issue is that there is something deep down in their heart that they know that the God of the Bible is the one true and living God, and they want desperately for that to not be true. And so they'll pay all their money, whatever they have to do to try to deny it, because they have thrown away the truth. They perverted, corrupted, and turned away from the truth. And they'll do whatever they can to try to convince you that they're right and the truth is wrong. So, all right. So you said it's a good enough answer for you. Okay, then I think I don't have any other questions coming in as far as I know. And I think we can go ahead and close down the live stream for tonight. I appreciate everyone coming to be a part of it. Apologize, I know it'd be better if it was Dr. Martin than me, but hopefully you got some stuff that helped you, and hopefully this was at least a good companion to clean up some of the loose ends that were left when I preached on frowardness the other Sunday, because I didn't get nearly as much in on that as I wanted to. But anyways, hopefully this is a help to you. You can go ahead and leave amen in the comment. I forget to put that little banner up. But I'll go ahead and throw that up now as we get ready to close down. But I appreciate you being here. Look forward to having everybody with us at church tomorrow who's able to be there. And I think there was an issue that we said one person was cooking. I think we said Joe was cooking, but it's actually Lavinia, I think, tomorrow. So let me just point that out. But we'll be preaching on a passage that I find very interesting there in Hebrews 5, where Paul solidifies himself as one of the king of insults. And I do believe Paul wrote Hebrews, but if you disagree with me, that's fine. But I'll explain why another day, why I believe it was him. Some really, really good, solid evidence for it at the end of the book. But he solidifies himself as one of the king of insults as he tells people that I would like to explain to you more about why Jesus is Melchizedek. I just can't, because you're too dull of hearing. You don't listen to anything. It's some pretty tough stuff. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow, and how when you're dull of hearing, it makes it so that you can't learn and you can't grow. So that's where we'll be at tomorrow. Hopefully you can join us. We look forward to having you as part of the study, and appreciate you being here for this study tonight.